Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to yet again another fantastic indie creator interview. It's your Cape Crusader Cody, and we are keeping it geekly with our new friend Jordan Hart. We're here to break down Ripple Effects issues 1 through 5 and everything in between. And man, this was such an awesome story. Holy crap, I could not believe the depths you added to this. But before we get into it too far, Jordan, welcome to the stream. How are you doing tonight?
Thank you. I am doing great. Thank you for having me. The Ripple Effects trade released today, so it's a great day, and can't think of a better way to close it out than talking comics with you here. So
absolutely.
Thank you for having me again.
And then right here, for everyone that is watching, here is the link. It is literally the day before New Comic Book Day. Treat yourself by checking this book out. It is a really cheap price too. I think it's almost 200 pages, right, for $24.99. So like outstanding.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
And this is like, this story it hits on so many deep levels. I love it. But before we start with that, let's begin with who you are and how you got into creating comics.
All right, great. Yeah. So my name is Jordan Hart, and my first comic book was published in 2016. After like 3 years, maybe. 3 years of grinding to just try to break into comics, right? Which is kind of standard procedure. But lifelong comic fan. I got my first comic when I was 3. It was the graphic novelization of Ghostbusters 2. I was a huge Ghostbusters fan, so my parents knew I loved to draw. They thought getting me a comic book would be a good thing, which is awesome, right? Legendary move by them. And so I picked Ghostbusters, but not like, honestly, not because of the medium, right? Just because I loved Ghostbusters. But then when I was 6, I was at the grocery store with my mom, and I saw Jim Lee's X-Men #1 on the stand. And it was like the Cyclops Wolverine Iceman cover. And I still remember it. It was like, my mind was blown. I was like, Mom, don't even buy me food this week. This is all I need. Like, obviously she bought me food, but she did have enough cash left over to buy X-Men 1. And then that was it, you know.
Oh man, game over.
It's been comics. So I've been going to cons. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You know, growing up, my Comic Cons were in bowling alleys. They were like half trading cards, half comics. So, you know, to see where the cons are now and to go to them is surreal on many levels. And to see that Iron Man is a household name and Captain America is a household name, and it's just like, it's crazy, but it's awesome. I love it.
I love the experience too, doing it in like bowling alleys and such. You know, because that's really, you know, the idea is just getting together for the love of comics. So like maintaining that no matter where it is, like that is such an awesome experience. Give us a little bit about some of the earlier works that you've been involved with.
Yeah. So my first comic book was called Terminarch. It was a one-shot put out by a publisher in LA called Awesome Comics. So that was a story about basically the robot revolution, but when they became self-aware and wiped out humanity, they spared artists, creative artists, humans, because they're like, art is the one thing they couldn't do or couldn't understand. So I call it a utopian dystopia, right? Where it's like they wiped out humanity like just to serve human artists and like give them anything they want. So that was, of course, there's like the narrative of, you know, it's a mystery and all that into it. But so that was my first. And then from there I did Doppelganger, which was a horror book. And that came out in 2017 to 2018. And that was just like a fun 80s Fright Night type horror book from back in the day.
So how long have you been working on Ripple Effects for? You have roughly about 5 issues, right? And all of them being collected in a trade paperback. So when did you initially start working on the very first issue with this?
So I started working on, Ripple Effects idea I had for quite some time, just never, we'll get into it later. I just never was in the headspace to write it. And then I finally started working on it in the end of 2019. And then I pitched it to my friends Barbara and Bryant, who run Fanbase Press. They own Fanbase, president and CEO of that. Because I felt like it was like the book that is just great for their slate, like the type of book they wanted to do. And they loved it. They made me an offer, that never happens in comics, that you pitch one place to get an offer. Like that's impossible. That doesn't happen. So yeah, I did that, and then I had the story ready to rock, and then 3 weeks later we went into lockdown in 2020, and there was a smaller scale pandemic in Los Angeles. In the story, there was a pandemic, there was a lockdown, there was a virus, and then it happened in real life. They're like, oh, let's change this, because people are not going to want to read. And like, I didn't want to write about it either, with like all that beginning of the pandemic either. So spent a couple months rewriting everything, and then it went into production in I think the art started in like August 2020, maybe September 2020 is when the art started from there. So yeah, the pandemic allowed us to shift gears. Like, I'm just so glad, because like if it would have been printed at the time the pandemic started, like it would have been bad news. So yeah.
I think that was a good move too, because like comics for a lot of people is like a form of escapism, right? You read to get lost into the world, to kind of break away, and it would suck to like read and be like, oh man, come on.
Totally. I mean, it's escapism for me, and that's what I thought right away. I was like, I'm literally reading comics right now to like not think about this for an hour a day. I don't want to do that. So yeah. Had the art been created and everything, it would have been a lot more challenging to pivot. So I'm glad that that it timed out.
So ripple effects is we were talking about this, is a really interesting concept. I love it so much. It's about George. He finds out that he is pretty much invincible. He is riding on his scooter, runs into a car, realizes that he's okay. And surprisingly didn't like break a bone, like didn't have any like sort of flesh wound. And it was so awesome too, because later on, and is this spoiling, or is it okay to talk about?
Yeah, we can talk about it. Yeah, it's out there. So,
like when he goes to the bank, and then there's like a rocket launcher explodes, and he like survives from it, and then he encounters another superhero, and it's at this moment we realize that he's not as like invulnerable as we thought, and like his glucose starts dropping, and we've come to find out is a type 1 diabetic. So even though he's like invincible on the outside, he has this invisible disease that ultimately, if he's not in check 4 times a day, he'll die from.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. Like, so that was the whole angle of the story, right? Is to, if I have a one sentence to pitch it, it would be like, well, Superman has kryptonite. Imagine if Superman's kryptonite was his own body, was type 1 diabetes, right? So like, that was the wrinkle of the story, how it started. And then I knew what I wanted to do was just really focus on the human side of having an invisible illness, which I have. So that's, I have a blood clotting condition that's incurable. I have to take medicine every day, essentially, to stay alive, right? Just like George. So, I was in the hospital when I was diagnosed with it, and there's a lot to, process. But then I was like, this would make a really good story idea one day. Like a person that's invincible, but their own body is trying to kill them. They have to take medicine to stay alive. So that's what I wanted to do with this story. And I like I mentioned earlier, grew up with superhero stories. So this is my first superhero story that I've ever written. Usually I just do horror sci-fi books, but I wanted to do a superhero book, but I wanted to put a different spin on it and really focus on, the human side of having a chronic illness. And that was my goal.
I love so much when he got the suit, sees there's a little case on the side for his pen. Yeah. I love his first patrol. It's almost like we're watching him like evolve into a superhero. Like, he's not like out there like throwing haymakers. Like he's pretty much like hoping at one point that these guys are going to stop just like stomping his face in. I loved those little subtle touches that you threw in. Well, what was some of the inspirations behind George and like kind of his evolution into becoming Ripple, right? Was his alias? Yeah.
Yeah. So, really, George is, I would say, of all the characters I've ever written, George is probably the closest to me that I've ever written. His parents are for sure like my parents, right? Just with different names and backgrounds. So, I just really pulled on, what it was like when I was first adjusting to life with a chronic illness and just all the stuff that comes with that, from stress and anxiety to medical debt to, whatever. So that's what I wanted to build. And, I knew I wanted him to be anxious and insecure because that's just how I felt at the time. And I think that's what makes the story so interesting is he has this power that like so many millions of people would want. You're invincible. Like you can not get hurt, but he's just nervous and insecure that he doesn't use it. He hides it. He hides it from everyone. Doesn't want anyone to know. So I just wanted to build interest like that, like having, an inner conflict of, having this incredible gift, but having the fear of that anyone who's ill has about all the things that can go wrong, and not realizing that.
And like we stated earlier, he's the only one who can penetrate his skin, which I thought was a really awesome idea too, because at one point, he's knocked out cold and he's about to die. Like it causes some problems for him too.
Yep. Yeah. And that's where a lot of his anxiety comes from about wanting to hide his powers, because should he need emergency surgery or like anything internally, no one can help him. He would have to do that. So that's where the fear and the I think issue 2 is titled the superhuman paradox, right? Like that's him, where nothing can hurt him, but if it does, no one can help him either. So it kind of feels like he's on an island that way.
I loved how with like issue 2 and issue 3, you kind of flesh out more of the superheroes in the world too. It's not just him having this power. There's actually a world of superheroes, and we get a taste of what I'm assuming is a villain. I haven't had a chance to read all of issue 3, 4, and 5. Are we going to see any more villains in this series?
Oh yeah, big time. There'll be lots of villains, especially in issue 4 and issue 5. So of all different kinds too, like. There's like an unseen villain. There's a possible human villain, a superhero villain. Then there's someone who you don't know if they're a villain or if they're a hero. So yes, the antagonism really multiplies in issue 4 and 5.
And I just love the different parts of this story that all like just cultivate around him too. We were talking about how you add a whole layer of like humanizing to him. Like he's in medical debt. He's looking for ways to get out of it. We find him when he is in his initial accident, like on his way to make ends meet to start paying this off. And I just love all those different elements you tie into it as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Living with his parents, right? Like as someone in your mid to late 20s, that's the last thing you want to do is live with your parents still. So yeah. He's having a tough time when the story starts out, for sure.
But I gotta say, one of my favorite parts though is like the very end of each issue. You have a segment from someone in the scene, who has an invisible disease and how it affects them, and I really love that part too. I think that added such a level of like a personal feeling to it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was I was working with Barbara and Brian Dillon at Fanbase. So like, how can we add, something more for readers than just this story, like real life, what can we add? And, having a design background, I was like, well, should we do infographics in the back of every issue, like that, like highlight the number of people with illnesses or information like that. And they had a great idea. And it's like, well, why don't we just get essays from people in the comics industry, in the comics realm who have an invisible illness, and each episode be a different one. And then, they can relate their illness and what they went through to what George went through in that issue. And I was just like, mind blowing, incredible. Like that's such a good, so that was 100% them. And it seems to be just like you, that is what people are really loving and enjoying. And I love it. And so I wrote, when you get to issue 5, I wrote the essay in issue 5 and kind of tie them all together. And it was hard, like you're opening up a lot of wounds, but I knew that, it's how ripple effects exists is me going through that. So yeah, major credit to Barbara and Brian for coming up with that idea and finding such great people to offer such great essays, and to all of them for opening their wounds to write it out there to help other people. We really saw that effect at Comic-Con this summer. When issue 1, we had a convention exclusive variant of issue 1, and people coming to the booth and talking about reading that, and it was a great feeling. It was awesome.
No, I love it. It's been a while since I've read something that like really touched me on that level, that deepness of level. It was really personable. Can we is there any way we could talk a little bit about some of the meaning behind like the ripples, like when George, when he's hit by the car, like it seems like it's such a big like emphasis on the ripple effect. What was the kind of the meaning or symbolism behind that?
Okay, yeah. So I knew that I wanted George's invincibility to be visually interesting, right? Like just because I think we've all seen just Superman walking through an onslaught of bullets, or we've seen invincibility so many times in different ways. Like, how can I do something more interesting? So then I thought, well, what if it's like his skin is absorbing the blow, the damage, whatever it is, and it's so he gets hit in a arm and it ripples, his skin ripples because it's absorbing and diffusing, it's diffusing the harm. And then that was the idea I had. And then I really liked for the series the title Ripple Effects, because it speaks to, one, the surface level, his superpower, which is the rippling of any injury, but the subtext is the ripple effects of being chronically ill, like, and that's what this story is like, in issue 2 we see through a flashback how George got type 1 diabetes and how he was diagnosed, and then the whole present, day story is really the ripple effect of him getting ill. Well, and most importantly, both good and bad, right? Like most people would say, it's only gonna be negative stuff coming out of that. But like, I wanted to really, focus the story on the good and bad that come after a diagnosis. So yeah, that's the double meaning of the series name.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. And I think you did from what I read, I think you did an awesome job of balancing both, showing the good and the bad. And I think it's important when talking about this type of matter, right? Like to show both sides, because it's not always pretty and it's not always ugly. I think showing that balance of both is it's healthy, right?
Totally. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Because that was what I strived for more than anything, was to show a balanced and a realistic portrayal of that.
Oh, that is so awesome. So can we talk a little bit about what's included with the trade paperback deal that's going on with Fan Press?
Yeah, so
Fan Base Press, excuse me, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, so story-wise, you're getting all 5 issues of Ripple Effects, which they're bigger than your standard issues. That's one of the nice things about going digital with single issues, is that usually you're not confined to the 22 pages for issue. So one of them is 24 pages, another one I think is 38. So like it's like 6 issues worth of content. You're getting all the compiled essays, of course, for everything, and then there's a cool bonus section, like just showing how the pages were developed, how I pitched it, like one of the pages from my pitch to Barbara and Bryant, and then just the process of script to pencils, inks, colors, lettering. I always love reading that when I read books. I just always love seeing that process. It's like the like on DVDs back in the day, the bonus content,
or the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, the behind the scenes, the blooper reel, all that fun stuff. So I always love to include that if possible.
And then right here is that link for Fanbase Press to pick up this trade paperback. You can get it starting today, right? Buy it today. And it's day before New Comic Book Day. Be sure to check it out. If you're unable to buy it, simply putting it on Facebook, Twitter, anywhere you can, social media. Word of mouth is 100% free, and getting as many eyes on this is, it's such an awesome book. You're missing out on it if you don't pick it up. Jordan, let me ask you, what's next for you on, in the future after this? Any other big projects in the works?
Yeah. So the project list is never ending, right? Like I should say the idea list is never ending. But the hard part is, of course, especially in comics, which takes so long to hit the shelves, like picking which project to go with next. So,
oh yeah.
So what I have my list of ideas, and I have the ones I like. So what I'm going to do is now that the trade came out today, I'm going to take the next couple of weeks to kind of just enjoy it, relax. And then starting January 1st, my goal is to pick the next comic idea to dive into. So we'll see how that goes. I mean, easier said than done. I'm sure I'll pick 3 and then not be able to narrow it from there, but we'll see.
Hey, well, congratulations on finishing up this series, though, knocking all 5 issues out and seeing it to the trade paperback. That is an achievement all in itself, right? And such an important message within it.
Totally. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we end things completely, let me ask you for one piece of advice for anyone who might be new that is listening, for anyone out there who might be struggling getting going with the writing or the art or anything in between and just needing a little bit of motivation. What type of, advice would you offer them to help them just get going?
Don't give up. That's all I have to say is don't give up. There are so many people that love and want to make comics, and just a certain number that can get published. And if you just keep slamming, you will get there. So just keep going. But to answer your question of if they need motivation, like if it's just motivation of what they should do, what they should create, focus on telling the story that only you can tell. Right. So, and that doesn't mean you have to tell your life story. It's like, say you love Phil Collins, right? The musician, you love Phil Collins. So in one of your characters, make them a Phil Collins super fan, or make them hate Phil Collins. And then because you're such a fan of Phil Collins, the
antagonist.
You could fill in all the blanks about why someone wouldn't like them, and it would feel so authentic and real, right? And
Tarzan must have rubbed them the wrong way. They must have been in theater like, oh, the soundtrack is horrible. Like,
I know, yeah. So it's like fill the whole world, but see, your love of Phil Collins is going to let you tell a story either pro or anti Phil Collins better than you or I or anyone else in the world ever could. So write something that only you can do.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for that advice. Everyone watching, here is that link one more time. Jordan, thank you so much for swinging by and breaking down Ripple Effects. This was such an awesome chat. Everyone watching, this has been a lovely Tuesday night. I hope you all have an awesome night, but most importantly, keep it geekly.